When I started this series last week, I mentioned to you that I think that the place you call your spiritual home should be a place that you can go to get some information, to get some guidance on how to be in this world and stay true to your spiritual nature. That wherever you call your spiritual home should be giving you some of that. Not the person who's talking. The person who's talking should just really be kind of pointing the way, like saying, check that out over there, not making out a bunch of rules, but giving you some ideas to think about, to go and use in your daily life. And I think if your spiritual home is not doing that, then we're falling short. So my intention always is to point this over here. It's not me that has the answer, but this over here is something you might want to consider. And that's the whole idea, I think, or one of the ideas about being in spiritual community, a place that you can rely on to get some spiritual guidance, to make yourself, to allow yourself to grow. And so in this series I mentioned, it's a tough little series. Brene Brown's book is Pulling No Punches. I don't know how many of you have opened the book, but someone who has is like, yeah, it's pulling no punches. It's calling us to go deep into ourselves, because that's the first place we look, is deep into our own selves and saying, is this really who I want to be? Do my words and my actions, the way I conduct myself in the daily life, is this who I want to be, or do I need to make a change? And I'm saying some of the things that she's calling us to do in these practices are pretty darn radical. They're radical. They're not anything that makes sense to most of the people in our lives, maybe. And that's why they're radical, because they almost seem to be counterintuitive, that they don't fit together. So last week I talked about the first practice that she talked about, and that is, it's hard to hate people close up, so get close. Is really what it's about. Get close, zoom in. And how we experience life when we zoom in, when we're right next to each other, with the people we know and the people we love and the people who help us and the people in our daily lives, it's a lot different experience than living zoomed out when we're on the internet, clicking buttons and aligning or not aligning with people we agree with or disagree with, who we don't even know. So that's what it was like last week. Zoom in. And I gave you the story of a hero of mine called Daryl Davis, who did exactly that and is doing exactly that today. So give a listen to that if you weren't here last week. But this week I want to talk about a second practice that Brene talks about in her book, and that is speak truth to BS, but be civil. Speak truth to BS, but be civil. Now those two things, that statement in itself seems like a paradox. Like those two things could never be together at the same time. If I'm to speak my truth, how in the world can I align myself and be civil? Well, let's just talk a minute about what she calls BS. What does that really mean? What is that? What is the definition? Because we really have to lay that groundwork in order to talk about it. Well, really, that patch of dirt is somewhere between telling the truth and telling a lie. It's that patch of dirt in between that makes no sense really, has no foundation, is usually gibberish and on kind of thing. And it has no foundation. There's no sense to it, is where it falls. Now, the first radical move that we can make is to understand how we participate in BS. Because we do, if we're honest with each other. And if we are to stand in the midst of others participating in that, we need to examine it first in our own selves. So there's some ideas that she presents about how we might notice when we ourselves are participating in that patch of dirt, when we're ground in there. Anytime we participate in conversations or discussions where we let pure emotion drive us, we are probably in BS. Because when we are really emotional about something, we don't even want to hear the other side. We are so having blinders on, we even say things like, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it now. Yeah. Are you recognizing that? You don't even want to hear it. You don't even want to consider. So if you are totally driven by emotion when you are having a discussion or sending an email, wherever you find yourself, then you are probably in the field, in that patch of dirt between telling the truth and telling a lie. Here's another one. If you are talking about things that you have no idea about really, only because you think you should have an opinion about just about any topic that comes up in any conversation, anytime. We really think that way too often. We really think and feel like we need to comment on everything anybody ever brings up. Does that sound familiar to you? Like, how much do we, I'll use myself. How much do I really know about trade wars? Nothing. How much do I really know about what's happening in Syria, the Sudan, or Myanmar? How much do I really know what's going on there? How much do I know about Obamacare and how it affects small businesses? How much do I really know about the value of charter schools versus public schools? How much do I know about complex social and global issues, but I feel the need to comment on them? You know, when we find ourselves in that place, we are in that patch of dirt between telling the truth and telling a lie. Maybe we just don't want to appear as if we're out of touch. But really where we are is on that patch of dirt called BS. Here's a quote that really speaks to this by Rachel Wolchin that says this: "Maturity is realizing how many things don't require your comment." The third idea is a little bit different and a little kind of the opposite of this. And it really is about believing, having a belief, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that we'll never really know the truth because it's too complex. There's really not going to be a truth we're ever going to get to the bottom of, so we might as well just make it up and call what we know truth. Brené Brown says it this way: "It's like we just collectively shrug our shoulders and say, well, whatever. It's too hard to get to the truth, so if I say it's true, it's good enough." That's the field, the patch of dirt between telling the truth and telling a lie, where we find ourselves sometimes. The field of BS. The fourth idea is this belief that some of us use. And I found myself using it once on the phone when I was preparing this message. And I caught myself. This belief that you are either with me or against me. You either for me or against me. Like there's no other place in between. We all know that we don't live our lives in black and white. That we live our lives in multiple shades of gray. But when we are in the field of BS, the solution is either you are with me or you are against me. Nothing else. And you can see how that stops things cold. It stops things cold. Those are the ideas that I pulled from the book that I think are relevant for us. When we find ourselves in those places, we need to reflect on our own selves and decide, wow, that's really where I went with that. Because until we can tame our own BS, it's going to be really difficult to step into other people's and be solid with it. We have to look in the mirror first and decide. You get it? That's the work that we have to do. And that is radical, my friends. Most people don't want to go there. Most people are not interested at all in looking in the mirror and calling their own self out in that way. That's a radical way of being. Most people don't operate that way. It's much easier just to believe that everything I say is right and what everybody else says is wrong, but it's really not the spiritual way of acting in the world. It's not. So that's the first radical step, is to call out yourself and to remember those areas of Do I really know about this? Do I know enough to comment on it? Do I want to participate with emotion only guiding me? Do I really want to believe there's only two solutions to every problem, either for me or against me? You know, that's pretty radical. But it's necessary that we go there. And once we start to tame that in ourselves, then we can learn how to speak truth to BS when it happens with other people. Okay? That's how it works. Me first. Me first. So when you find yourself in the midst, there's some radical actions you can take, and they are radical, my friends. I don't know if there's something that we can consider possible in our life. But if I was radical, what would I do in the midst of BS? And the first thing is, of course, it's on your card, and that is the practice of being civil. Now, being civil means to respect myself and to respect the other person. To care for myself and to not degrade the other person. What we're really talking about, to be civil in the midst of that chaos of BS, that patch of dirt between the truth and a lie, is integrity. Is to be able to stand in integrity with who I am and what I want to be, and to not degrade the other person. That's what it means to be civil. To not get caught up in the emotion of it. To not be dragged down by that, but to be civil. And the first practice that I believe we can employ is the idea of being curious. If I'm with someone who I'm in disagreement with, what if the first idea was to be curious about their point of view? I think we see children being curious and think it's the most awesome thing. And when we become adults, we decide curiosity is no longer the best thing to do. But what about if we were curious, if we were really interested in what was driving the opinion or the ideas of somebody else? What if we just decided that? To ask a few questions like, tell me more. If we pull ourselves away from the emotion of it, we would be able to ask that question. If we said, well, where did you find that? Tell me what you were reading. How did you come to know that? You know, what about that makes you feel good? What about if we were genuinely curious about someone who held a polar opposite belief than us? You know, that's what Daryl Davis did. If you were here last week, that's the kind of approach he had. What if we did that, practicing curiosity? There was a story in the book that Renee tells about a time when she was giving a lecture, and there was someone in the audience who came up with her halfway through at the break and said, "You really hurt my feelings." And of course, Brene Brown didn't think she said anything that hurt anybody's feelings. And she immediately got that sick feeling in their stomach, like if one of you would stand up right now and shout out, "You don't know what you're talking about," I'd be like, ooh. Right? You get that kind of feeling in your stomach. And the woman explained, says, "You used the word gypped." And Brene was like, "Well, yes, I did." Like, she didn't understand what the issue was. And the woman said, "Gypped. How do you think you spelled gypped?" And Brene didn't know. She was thinking J-I-P-P, you know, what is that? And the woman says, "Gypped. G-Y-P-P-E-D, gypped. It's a derogative term related to gypsies. And you used it." And Brene said, "Wow, I didn't know. I didn't know that that was a derogatory term. I didn't know." And because they had this conversation, and Brene didn't immediately put up a wall and tell her to sit down and shut up, she came to understand something that she didn't know. Well, I heard an interview on NPR's show A1 this week with Sarah Silverman. And the quote that she had that addresses this specifically is this. She said, "I decided to live a life where I let myself be changed by information. I let myself live a life that's changed by new information." That's curiosity, my friends. That's being curious enough. I'm not saying you're going to change your mind in every situation, But golly, we walk around sometimes as if we know everything, when we don't. And we would admit that we don't, but when we're emotional about something, maybe not so much. Here's another practice that I think we can use, and that is the practice of empathy. So think of yourself in the middle of that BS kind of situation with other folks, and the practice of empathy. Sarah Silverman, in that same interview, gave this quote that she used that was by a former racist skinhead. And this man's quote is this: "Find someone who doesn't deserve your compassion and give it to them. Find someone who doesn't deserve your empathy and give it to them." You know what it did for this man? It brought him out of the racist skinhead lifestyle. Because someone chose at some point in his life to show him compassion, to show him empathy. That's what's possible. We've talked before at Spiritual Soul Center about creating space. And that's what empathy does. Empathy creates some space in there for some love to show up. It creates some space in there for things to change. Not because your opinion is the right one, but because it creates space for God to show up, for love to show up. When I'm speaking truth to BS, you notice I'm not speaking much. I'm practicing empathy. I'm practicing curiosity. And the way I can do that is to have a strong sense of what I believe at my core. That I come from love. It's a different place. It's radical. It's not easy. It's radical. Just like Jesus, just like Muhammad, just like Mandela, just like King, just like whoever your hero is, it's radical. It's not what the people beside you are going to say, "Oh yeah, that's what I do." It's radical. The third thing is that we need to be able to critically think. We need to be able to develop our critical thinking skills instead of just listening to what the bobbleheads are saying on the news networks. Or even someone who is BSing. We don't have to listen to that and take it in and get emotional about it. We don't have to try to convince someone else what we think. We simply need to remind ourselves to not get in the trap of you're either for me or against me. No, we don't need to go there. I want to give you an example. In Brene Brown's book, she tells a story about this exactly. And she was raised in the South. She was raised when she was a young girl to shoot guns. I mean, that's what they did. She was taught how to do that. Her father was an avid hunter. Everything they hunted, they ate. He was very particular. There was no sport about it of just killing animals. And she was raised in the culture of respect around guns. And she was called on the carpet about that in a group she was with. And they said, "Oh, you don't strike me like the NRA type right away. Someone's attacking her about this." And she said, "I'm not sure what you mean by that I'm a gun lover or an NRA type. You know, that's the only choices that she was given, right? She's either this or that. You're either with me on guns or you're against me on guns." But she said, "You know, that's not true. That's not true." I said, she took a deep breath and said, "Well, you're making assumptions about me. I do support responsible gun ownership. I do not in any way support the NRA. Just because I support gun ownership." That's what she said. But this woman looked confused, and she says, "But with all the school shootings, I don't understand why you don't support gun control." She said, "I absolutely support common sense gun laws. I believe in background checks and waiting periods. I don't believe that it should be legal to sell automatic weapons, large magazines, or armor-piercing bullets. I don't believe campus carry." And at that point, the woman was so angry. She said, "You either support guns or you don't." She wasn't even listening. Now let's be in that person's brain for a minute, not Brené's. Is that what you would do? Is that what I would do? You either support guns or you don't. And she's trying to explain. She says, I know that this is hard and a heartbreaking issue, but I don't think you're hearing me. I'm not going to participate in a debate where this issue is reduced to you either support guns or you don't. It's too important. If you want to have a longer conversation about it, I'm happy to do that. And I wouldn't be surprised if the same issues make us mad and scare us. That's critical thinking skills, my friends. That's understanding where you stand and not be afraid. She goes on to say probably a lot of people in that room hate her. But the reason she felt good is she was able to be in integrity, to say what was hers to say, to not degrade the other person, to not try to convince them of what was right or wrong, and to stand in what she knows as her truth. We got to develop those critical thinking skills because this is too important. It's too important for us not to stay silent, and it's too important for us not to tip the boat and jump off and make a big splash. It's so important for us to be in integrity in all these situations that happen in that dirt patch between telling the truth and telling a lie. When we do that, we open up ourselves to release that love that these situations are calling for. That's the spiritual nature of what I'm talking about today, is we open up a place for love to be. And when we're silent, that doesn't happen. And when we're emotional and flying off the handle, it doesn't happen either. But it happens in that place of curiosity, of understanding, of critical thinking. That's where it happens. And it's so important that each of us learn how to be there. Because on our great days, we show up and we're civil. And on our really great days, we show up and we're love. So let's take that into meditation today. I invite you to get comfortable in your chair, to take a deep breath in and take a deep breath out. And take this time to reflect just a little bit. To look in the mirror. And notice the places where I find myself so emotional that I can only see one way. Let me find a way to be curious. Let me find a way to practice empathy. Let me find a way to stand in my truth and not degrade the other, but open up a place for love to do its work. You make all the difference in the world. You make all the difference in the world when you show up as love. When you show up with an open heart. When you show up willing to be curious. Willing to show compassion where none appears to be called for. Willing to be love always. So take a deep breath and know this. God blooms from the shoulder of the elephant who becomes courteous to the ant. So another deep breath in and out. Bring your attention and your presence back to this moment. To know that the time spent together in this vibration is a gift, not only to yourself, but to the world. One more time, in and out. We know all is well.